Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of the Reaction Time podcast. It is EU free agency week. We are going to talk all about each of the LEC teams' roster changes that have been confirmed. I think, as I scroll the spreadsheet that Eric has beautifully put together, we have at least almost confirmed information about all 10 of these rosters, so we'll be able to do some speculating. And Eric has chosen to be our European Masters expert of the night. So he actually knows stuff about some of these players that I haven't ever heard of because I didn't watch the EU Masters tournament. So expect a lot of Eric content and Steven and I sitting here to look pretty. So just get ready for that. It's what we do best.
What's
but
new?
I am joined, as usual, by Eric and Steven. Gentlemen, how's it going tonight?
I'm doing good.
Going good.
Steven, you look like you're imagining warmer weather.
I am. No, I made an amateur hour play and put all the funky merch in the dryer to get cleaned for photo shoots for Christmas season. And there will be a new a product site coming up shortly, probably by the time this video goes up, to buy products and other Christmas goodies for all you gamers out there.
So check that out. I'm sure there will be an appropriately linked item in the YouTube video for you to click on and make your life very easy, if I know Steven at all.
I do try.
With that said, we're going to do about the same thing we did last week with going through each of these rosters and kind of seeing where we feel about them. And I'm going to do the same thing I did last week and start from the bottom and work my way up from kind of what we expect, because I think it's more interesting to build in that direction. So what that means is we're going to start with Astralis, who have bought out, who had already owned the Origin brand, I think, since the beginning of last year, but had allowed Origin to continue operating under its own name in the LEC because of previous branding experience. Obviously, Origin on its own has been a huge brand over the years in League of Legends, with Astralis being a much bigger brand in Counter-Strike. But the organization made the decision to fully rebrand as Astralis and have everything unified under the Astralis banner this year. So they will be running as Astralis in the LEC this year. Their roster, which I believe is confirmed at this point, is White Knight in the top lane, Zanzara in jungle, Nuke Duck returning in the mid lane, and Jeskla and Promiscu in the bot lane with Coach AOD. This Origin team, as it was previously set up, didn't do particularly well to begin with. And in a world in the LEC where many teams have delved into the EU Masters to pick players up, I know Eric has some thoughts on the players they did choose to pick up.
Yeah, so for starters, Zanzara played on the Rogue team, which is 4 out of 5 team members from that team that won this past EU Masters now promoted into LEC, which is an incredible success rate when you think about it, especially considering their 5th team member, Woolite, who hasn't been picked up yet, probably was the best performing member of their team, but just had prior league experience, so maybe he got passed up. The most infamous Zanzara play is his taking red buff on Trundle, then flashing the wall in Dragon Pit level 2 to go invade on the other side of the map. And and aside from greedy pathing and flash plays, is a pretty good jungler overall. So
and the conversation around that clip that I've seen, because that was a while ago now, and I've followed. I know Shakaris, who's a Riot content producer, posted a clip of it on Twitter, and I've seen plenty of pro players talking about, like, if your team plans around it and this is like a scripted thing, it's actually really broken if you do it right.
I have to agree. As a smooth-brained jungler who likes to aggressively take dragons, hell or high water.
If you queue up against Ireland, just guard your red buff level 1, and you'll be generally speaking okay. Yeah.
Feast or famine. That's the only way to play.
So the other side of the map, they have Jeskla and Promiscu, who they brought over from Mouse Esports. So with this past EU Masters, the final ended up being between the Rogue from the from the Polish league, who looked fantastic and were the best team in the tournament, against Gamer Legion, who had the best cheese in the entire tournament. Gamer Legion had Hjarnan in bot lane, and he played Vel'Koz, Nico, Swain, and Heimerdinger, except it got banned a lot for like the entire tournament. He also played like some Jinx games and like hard carried that team. It's really striking when you see 4 out of 5 members from Rogue's team make it into LEC, and none of the players from Gamer Legion made it up.
I'm really disappointed we don't get another Hjarnan run in the LEC, if I'm being honest. Like,
Yeah.
I loved watching the creative shit he managed to pull off on G2 when he was
Yeah.
on the... That's obviously like been the genesis of the Heimerdinger pick when we saw it at the highest level, when we saw it at Worlds with G2.
Yeah.
And, like, it works still when you have a player that knows how to play around these things and stretches the limitations of the game. Like Hjarnan is capable of doing. He's doing stuff that basically no one else is doing in the world, and it's effective enough for his team to get to the final of this tournament. Like, there's value in that if a team wanted to commit to that. So I'm disappointed we don't get to see Hjarnan back in LEC for that reason, but at the same time, I kind of understand why.
So then they ended up with Jessica and Promiscu. They were actually picking up the bot lane from Mouse Esports. And so the Mouse versus Rogue match was in many ways like the true final of the event, because these were like the actual non-cheese best performing teams. And so seeing like Promiscu and Jessica, like these aren't low tier players. They're very good, but they did get smashed in that series, and their best performing players on Mouse, in my opinion, from like watching them play from this Masters set, as well as from like seeing some of their games from prior splits, were actually Lighter and Upsess from that Mouse lineup. And so while Jessica and Promiscu like played pretty well, and Promiscu, I believe, is taking some extent of the shot calling for this roster. Like they didn't even take the best parts of that team. It was taking these players then now who are going to have to really step up when they aren't working with a roaming assassin mid lane player, and when they have a more calculating jungler. So it'll have to. So like this team really fills out in a way where it's going to be very slow, and it's going to be very methodical in how they approach the game. And that's really dangerous going into this split. And then to wrap it all up, they have White Knight in top lane, who didn't even make it to EU Masters in this past split, and looks about the same as he did since he was on Unicorns of Love in I think it was EU LCS at the time, not LEC, but like is a tank player, and so they're going to have a tank in a top lane. They're gonna have a decent bot lane matchup, and it's really gonna boil down to can Zanzara and Promiscu pressure on the map and maybe unlock Nuke Duck somehow. Because if you don't unlock Nuke Duck, the team loses dramatically, which we saw happen last year with, quite frankly, a much stronger roster.
So my question for Astralis mainly, I was doing some research on this before we looked it up because I wasn't sure what the situation was. All the LEC teams, I believe, by the requirements of the franchising model, are required to have an academy program at some point in the European leagues. Obviously, like, for example, Fnatic and Excel, I know, are both in the Northern League of Legends Championship, formerly the UK LC. Both being based in England, and I hadn't heard anything about Origins, so I went to go look up. The Origin Academy merged with Stormbringers, which is a Spanish organization, was playing in the second tier of the Spanish league. Like, not even the one that has any chance to qualify to the EU Masters tournament at all, because it's not even the top Spanish league. So I imagine that because Astralis is embracing their Danish roots and their Danish philosophy, that we're going to see an entirely new academy lineup, program, and team probably playing in the Northern League of Legends championship, or however they can get themselves into that area. And we know nothing about that as it stands. Well, while we've at least heard some things about how the NA Academy teams are shaking out. We haven't heard much about the lower tier European teams yet, as far as I've heard. I don't think the EU Masters teams are re-signing people to new contracts yet, or anything like that, because they've got to see how the top stuff shakes down before they pick anybody up. So I imagine that Astralis is going to commit in some fashion to a revamped academy based in Denmark, using Danish players or Nordic players to some extent. We haven't seen that confirmed. That's me speculating. They did say in a YouTube video that came out, I want to say a couple of weeks ago, that they're going to work on not necessarily an academy team, but academy-like system for building up future esports athletes in both Counter-Strike and League of Legends, and training them in the ways the system works. There's an article I linked in our Discord server that I think Steven can post somewhere, and there was a video that came out from Astralis that talks about their approach to that reminded me on reading and watching of what 100 Thieves is doing in North America. So it seems to me like, I think the criticism of who they chose to sign from the EU Masters tournament for their LEC team is very valid. And I do think they're going to seriously struggle in the start of the season just based on how it looks on the outset of things. But I'm really interested in what they're going to do on the lower level and on the academy level, particularly because with players like, we assume Nukeduck's contract goes through November of next year. So he's going to be on this team. But if this team struggles and it's around Nukeduck, you wonder if, say, Astralis has a good academy team and they've got a mid laner that's performing well, you start to see substitutes come in. Or if they pick a top laner for academy that's much more of a carry-based player, for example, or something like that, you could see a change in strategy based on that, working with through their academy system and trying to develop talent that way, rather than just focusing on this 5-man lineup in LEC, which I think could be a much more sustainable model moving forward for them. I need to see it, but I think that that's what it feels like this should be working towards for Astralis as an organization.
Yeah, I think a lot of teams are looking to do what they should have done when franchising started, whether that is with establishing their brand recognition or kind of getting their infrastructure set up. But I think we saw last year the exhaustion of talent, and there needs to be paths to create a forward momentum, take young talent, nurture them up, keep them under your brand, get people invested in these players, and make them either worth enough to trade off or put on your main roster. I think that's kind of what we're seeing with Astralis is okay, we got to course correct here. This might have been set out ahead of time. I'm sure there's projections and board meetings about what to do. But I think this is another one of the franchises that are looking to prolong their stay, which is great, which is what I hope to see with the sport in general. But also kind of using this kind of I'm looking at it as a slump year for everyone, as far as just no one knows what's going on, to okay, let's address these things now and then we'll reap benefits going forward.
So any other split, the gut reaction is just to say that this is a 10th place roster that Astralis put together. However, because they are not the only team that's heavily heavily invested in their future with ERL talent, and because of that, they could finish anywhere in the 5 through 10 slot in the standings.
That's kind of the split we see here. Is there are 6 teams, if I'm reading this right, that are playing multiple players that played in EU Masters last split, or in another league that's lower level than the LEC, for example. It's 6 different teams have multiple players that qualifies for.
Yeah, and so that leaves a ton of room for how well does the roster gel. What's this meta end up shaping up like? What's their momentum end up being as they go into the midpoint of the season?
I think this is also the year that we see a value add of coaching staff and ancillary staff beyond that. I like to think back to like what FlyQuest and C9 were like. Hey, we have teams that maybe aren't like the solo queue champions, but they mesh well together. They have the support structure. They read the meta well. I think that's what we're going to see is another renaissance of like, you don't need to just pick the top 5 players from your solo queue ladder, put them on a super team and call it a day. There is value in building up players and having the wider staff to support them, and you have a better team regardless of what that looks like on paper.
So moving on from them, let's take a look at XL's lineup. Another one that pretty heavily features less experienced players. With, I know Torre. What did Torre's ID used to be? I knew this.
Well, he was on Excel last split.
He was on Excel last year,
That's
but what was he?
Scarin, right?
He was North Scarin, right?
Yeah.
So Torre's been around the
Man.
higher leagues for a while.
Patrick was also
And
sheriff
Patrick was
originally.
also around.
Patrick.
Yeah.
But then
And,
you have Eric. Pronounce. Go.
Jekolad, because they have Jekolad, and then they have Dan, and then Kry's in top. So they kept 3 players from last split. Kry's, who it was his first split in the second split of 2019. Patrick and Torre had been on the roster the entire year. And then the new players are Dan and Jekolad. So like the big thing is that I'm actually very high on Excel going into this year, because they're actually almost a full year ahead of these other orgs that are investing in ERL talent. Like Kry's came up from that North League. Torre had dropped back down to ERL and had proven himself and is now back in the LEC. So like they're ahead of the curve on these other orgs that are going through this change. And they actually managed to almost eke their way into playoffs last split after a pretty bad start, largely from Patrick playing like a monster. But like they're one of the teams that you've seen their play style evolve and grow over a season. And so seeing that happen, speaking of coaching staffs and value, like this is a roster I put a lot more trust in than these other fresh ones, and expect to see Young Buck bring them to, if not like a very high finish, then at least in playoff contention, if not grabbing one of those open spots. Jekolad was on the Rogue team. He was one of their 2 carry players along with Wu Light and looked great. His Oriana's superb, so it's yet another great control mage mid laner in the LEC. Dan was the jungler for Fnatic Rising. So Fnatic Rising didn't make a deep run in EU Masters because there were a couple of groups of death in like the group stage of EU Masters. One of them had Mouse and Gamers Origin, and that was the one that Fnatic Rising got into. The other one had Gamer Legion and Rogue, aka the 2 finalists. So one group had both semi-finalists, the other one had both finalists. And so
Fnatic Rising went 10-0 in their group in the NLC and won the summer playoffs of the NLC. So that was a really quality team in their league.
And they stomped, I think they were in the group that had the Fox team, that's name I always forget. Imaginary Fox or something like that. But like, so Dan, one of the big things that you can know about Dan is that he has a really astounding first blood percentage. So even in their losses against Rogue and Mouse and Gamers Origin, he was getting first bloods. So he makes plays on the map. He's fairly active. In the tournament, he played a lot of Hecarim, but I don't know if that was a meta thing. So I'll pay less attention to like the champion picks with some of these players and more on like what they do. And Dan gets kills in lanes to snowball his laners, which seems pretty good with 3 carry lane players who are all young, and with a team that has a good game sense and macro and can transition leads into wins. So like I'm really high on where I expect Excel to end up, especially since they already have this head start, and like they didn't throw out their coaching staff or their complete roster as soon as they like failed to make playoffs.
Yeah,
Yep.
and they are on the trend of investing. They did a complete overhaul of their rebrand, which of course I pay attention to, as that is my, that's my shtick. But they showcase that well. They're putting the investment that looks good for corporate dollars, and like building a brand and building a following is so valuable. Like I think today that's why like teams like TSM are still here, because they build that following and they build a recognizable brand that people are willing to invest in. And so like build a team that you can showcase like what your staff can do. You can showcase what this brand represents, and those wins will come and go. And this is just another team solidifying themselves for the future in the next 10 years. So.
And it's the thing when we talk about knowns with the LEC, we know that Patrick is really good, and you have like just based on the reputation that you know about, you have 6 really good ADCs in this league already, and more good ones coming up from EU Masters. So it's you've got a good thing going at a position of strength in the league, and we'll see where they can build on from there with some of the new players they augmented last year's roster with. Let's move to Vitality next, an organization who had with a more veteran roster, it had decent success in previous years, but last split had moved away from, like, obviously Cableshard is the first player I associate with Vitality. That's always going to be true pretty much for their entire existence until something else happens. So moving away from that kind of identity is different for them, even though they obviously they've been working on putting new players in for a while at this point. But their lineup for the coming year is Shigenda in top lane, Skeens, Milica, Komp, and Labrov. And I know I did not refresh myself on their last spring roster. I know Milica and Komp both played last spring for them. Did Labrov do as well?
Yeah, and they were also subbing Skeens in and out. So like, yep. and so like, this is another team that, if you think about it, has already built up some time with these younger players, and Vitality's in this slot. However, they didn't have the same success that Excel did. So to some extent, I was hoping to see more out of what they'd try to do to shake it up, because all they've done is brought in Sagenda, who was pretty good on Rogue, but like he mainly played Ornn and showed up for fights and teleported. And so like it's not necessarily giving them better lanes necessarily. Maybe having another smart player can help out, because Skeens because Skeens was really over aggressive and had some terrible positioning and made some very bad plays, and that was a part of why Vitality looked bad last split. Komp is pretty good. He's like, I don't know if he was in your list of 6 really strong ADCs in LEC, but Komp was the best part of their roster. He just was given nothing to work with the rest of the players on the map. So I'm hoping that they can step it up, but it's really scary to me that their roster didn't change that much going into this, except for like losing Capo. So now you've lost your only veteran, and
but you've preached about AGO Rogue this whole time. You add AGO Rogue's top laner in Shigenda.
Yeah. Well, but going into it, like the players from Rogue who I would really want are Jekyllad, Woolite, and Trimby were like their players who, well, and Zanzara even more. Like he is my least favorite of the 5 players from Rogue, because he's the top laner. So if you're looking to improve your team's macro or gameplay or presence, you don't pick a top laner. You pick a mid laner, you pick a jungler, or you pick a support, because they're actually involved with the game. So it feels really awkward to me that's the upgrade they looked for, or the new talent they looked for, because I don't know if it adds enough in terms of how to play the game. I don't know. I don't know how this team is expected to succeed, I guess, is where I'm gonna be.
Well, maybe these ads are just here to enable, like, as you said, Skeens is like an intelligent player. Like, he wants players that he can depend on, and like a solid top laner enables you a ton. And that possibility with what they're building out here, are they like trying to invest in their as you're saying, they built up these younger talent. Now they're just kind of like filling out the gaps.
Well, it's yet another player on bot lane team is what they've really put together, where it's like they're gonna want to, like, you know, have top in a good state, hope Malitz is even in mid, and then they're just gonna 5v5 bot is kind of like what I'm expecting this team to do. Try and get comp ahead, give them some gold so that they can just start carrying in team fights.
Malitz is good is the thing I might worry about if I were looking at this team on the rest of the league. Although we do know that the mid pool in EU, from name recognition alone, took a hit with Perks' departure, even though he wasn't even playing mid lane last split. But like, you have Caps, obviously, and you have Larson and Abadage, who Abba performed remarkably at the end of the split with Schalke's run. But then you've got a few more of the less proven names as you scroll down the table. So it might be, as far as any time to be a weaker EU mid laner, it might be an okay split to be there, maybe.
And then you have people like Niski coming over as well.
It does feel like it's the thing that the good teams are gonna really punish. Like with any of these teams with a weakness in mid lane, like we haven't. We'll talk about G2, I promise, but like that's what's gonna get punished against these really, really top teams in the league.
And so maybe that's the opt-in on bot here. It's like, you know, you're not going to contend in a mid lane. Like, let's have our solid mid laner that we may or may not be able to depend on, but we're invested in. Get more resources down to our showman comp here and see how that rides. I see the logic.
Yep, for sure. With that, let's jump to Misfits next. Misfits have, again, they're another team that has a core of returners and veterans in terms of what they've got, because Razork and Kabe both played for this team last split, if I remember correctly, and Vander had a very successful split on Rogue, and I think is a great move for them to add to the bot lane. Kabe and Vander is a very, very good bot lane in theory. Theory, we've got to see it, but the theory of that seems really good for me. And then they add Aggressivu and Vethio in top and mid. So, Eric, give us the lowdown.
So, I don't actually know much about Vethio because, Do we
know where he came from?
Remember,
he was on LEC in the French league.
There we go. Oh, okay. Did he? Well, so he was on LDLC. Was he on the team with Tinks that played in this tournament? Oh yeah, he was. Okay, so Vethio came from LDLC, which is a fascinating team, like that had a lot of veteran ERL players. Is kind of how I talk about it. And
has potentially the most veteran of all EU players. Period.
In Yellow Star, and Yellow Star did not look good in this tournament. But it's very clear that he was still shot calling. He and Tinks definitely ran that team around the map, and then they counted on their other players to be mechanically good enough to make up for the fact that Yellow Star was hard hinting. And that was kind of like how the games played out. So we'll see how Vethio does. Aggressivu was from their Misfits Academy team. And they made EU Masters. From the games I watched, he had like one good Aurelia game against the Antonio, but most of the time they put him on tanks. Like a ton of these teams in the ERL leagues, like we're playing tanks top lane, and that's really boring. So like I always favor the teams that have top laners who play more exciting picks, even if they aren't the best, like the Antonio, who would play the Kennen, who would play the Vladimir, who would play these other picks that aren't just Ornn. And but but he looked okay. They also were in one of the more contested groups, and I was hoping that, I was hoping they'd do a bit more there. But that was kind of my feel on them. So I get why they picked their top laner, but like he was like a lot of these teams that I'm more questioning on as far as who they picked up, he wasn't even my favorite player from that roster. So now it's like, what are you doing with like promoting these players who are somewhat weaker from your ERL team because you had a need in your LEC roster for that role? And that's really like if it works out, great. But it's also like, are they ready yet? Like, have you actually put enough investment into these players so that they can show up on the stage and not look like an idiot against against like Broken Blade, Armut, Otawamne, Blippo, Wonder when they start playing in these games? Most of which are totally willing to play bizarre either counter tank matchups or just carries. So like I want to that's what we're going to watch is like both how they play against these top players and can they hold it together, and then also if they get paired up against these other players with less experience, can they actually punish? And top lane overall looks like the weakest lane in LEC this split as far as like the overall like skill level, with like a huge differential in mainly in experience between the top and the bottom.
And like, we talked about this when we talked about this roster at some point last week, and I'm never going to question that much when a team elevates someone from their academy team to the LEC, because we see what the teams like what Misfits Premier did in the LFL and what they did in the EU Masters is what we get to see. You would assume that the Misfits organization has internal work that they do with these teams, that there are probably scrims between the LEC team and the ERL team. And so there might be more knowledge about what kind of player Aggressivu is than anything we would ever know publicly within the organization. So we can question it to a degree, but not nearly as much as some of the signings that are just like the White Knight signing, for example. We had Eric explained the problems that he had with that. I can't justify that in the same way I can justify this, right? I trust that if the Misfits organization has a knowledge about a player that is their player already enough to elevate him to this roster, we can question that decision down the line, but I'm not going to question it from the get-go. I'll put it that way. And then, like, to some degree, Vethio kind of can fit into the same thing, because you have LDLC, another LFL team that I assume was well known, probably a common scrim partner for Misfits Premier, and definitely played against Misfits Premier in their own league. So it was Misfits seems like they went for familiarity rather than taking a risk, which might work and might not. Just like all of this, it might work, it might not. But I can see, like, that's what I see from their strategy in picking these two solo laners for what they're going.
I really like also how the Vander pickup works with Razork, because Vander is a veteran support and he's used to playing with all-star junglers like Yankos, who he had started playing with when they came up in Rockat. So like giving this like jungler who looked like one of the bright lights of Misfits since he showed up with the lighter roster from a while back. I like giving him a veteran support this time, and so that you have someone to help help Razork figure out how to communicate, to say what his plans are in the early game, and then transition shot calling later on around objectives, so that you have some leadership to help these players grow. And Vander is one of the players I think actually can succeed at that. Unlike some of the other veterans who other rosters have tried this with, and it hasn't worked out.
I think Vander's a great signing for them. I'm really excited about that. So with that, we're going to move to SK, who I think round out the most of the organizations that had significant changes in their rosters. There's one more that we're going to talk about in a little bit, but they got to go to Worlds, so I'm letting them go later in the conversation. So SK, they're running a Genax, Tinks, Blue, Jezu, and Treats. We obviously talked about Tinks earlier as a relevant player. He played on
LDLC.
on the Gamers Origin team that made it to the final of the
different one.
Say, did you lie to me?
No, Tinks was on LDLC.
Okay, you lied to me then.
Oh, I'm sorry. So Tinks played on LDLC. They were in a group with movie, but he's also played on other teams that have made it before, including Movie Star Writers and Gamers Origin.
Okay,
so
that's why.
Yeah. So he's been around for a while. Like last year, Tinks was one of the players Broken Shard said to watch for people who could maybe make it up and then have a lot of things. I'm really happy to see Tinks play. I think he's great. He's an aggressive jungler. He's been playing. He's kind of like a Graves one trick. So this past meta would have been fantastic for him to emerge into LEC. We'll have to see how things play out now with the new item patch. But that's always been his play style is power clearing, but then aggressing into the enemy jungle to lay down vision and then steal camps. And so I'm really happy to see him play at this level. And so that's why he's exciting. Sorry about my confusing notes on the side there. Those were my notes to like try to remember
to you and not just looking stuff up as I go.
Yeah.
Lesson learned.
Yeah. Because like he played on the LDLC comp that, and so they didn't have the best finish this year. But like their roster had some clear flaws, and so it was still cool to see them make the run.
Well, and we kind of stuck with our LFL theme here because we just talked about the additions that Misfits made from the LFL, and Jezu was a player to highlight on Misfits Premier.
Yeah, I didn't like him as much in the in this run. I thought that. So I really thought that Kyrie was the best player on that roster. But Kyrie's been around for a while. So I understand why teams maybe don't pick up Kyrie again when that's what's happening. But as far as like young talent, he definitely stepped up and was able to do the work that team had, I guess I would say. Aggressivu didn't have the best of times in their group, which was very contested. But Jezu and their bot lane did pretty well. Kyrie really snowballed the lanes, and that was like their win ticket. Was really how it would hopefully play out.
How much TCL did you watch last year, Eric?
I watched 0 TCL last year, David.
What do you want to say about you, Eric?
All right, so just from looking up stats, Blue's in a 0-1 trick. His laning stats are totally absurd. He was like the main. Whenever his stats are kind of scary though, because his stats always looked very good, even in their losses. But then which implied that he was given a lot of It looked like he was given a lot of resources, but then they still just wouldn't win in those situations. He was on 1907 Fenerbahce, and they had been
very good in their spring split and very mediocre in their summer split.
Yeah. And so it's hard to say like what exactly was going on there, but like his year looks sick. So if he's allowed to play that champion, and if it's yet again another control mage mid meta, like great. So that's all the info I really have on him. I didn't watch any gameplay. So like it's kind of weird though, because with Treats also coming in, SK even though they've replaced 4 of their 5 members from last year, keeping only Genax, who's their role swapped top laner. Remember, he played mid lane.
Yep. It will be his 4th split in LEC, but only number 2 in top lane.
Right, and so that's pretty crazy that that is how it's playing out. I'm kind of curious, I'm kind of curious, like, what Jezzy's is doing with this roster. Who's the coach for this team? But like, it's really interesting in that with Tinks and Blue and Treats, they actually have three of the most veteran and proven of the young players who are getting added to the league. Where it's like Treats has played in LCS as a starter, so he's played big games. Tinks has been around for ages. Blue was in the TCL, so like these players have been in a top level league of their region before. So it's really fascinating because in some ways, like if they succeed more, is that a sign that like these other players just are still growing? Or if they fail more, is it a sign that like maybe should they have gone for other like young unproven talents for more of these roles or something else?
Well, and Treats for one has been playing in. He's been around the pro scene since 2016. He's been around a long time. Like you don't realize it unless you've been paying attention. And he's been playing in the minor leagues for large chunks of that time. But he's been around the scene for a while now. You don't often see an LEC rookie come in at 24, but that's what's happening.
Yeah, he's very much a product of what channels there are available. And then I do see this as like, I don't want to call it like a discount super team, but like definitely looking at like some opportunities to pick up high performing players from maybe undervalued prospects. I think there's something to be said about having like a control mage one trick that maybe can like give opportunity to transition into other champions and different opportunities, but then have a security blanket of proven young talent. So I think maybe that's the play, is like get someone that has some unknown variables that you can grow and nurture to make them really shine, but also then growing up some more controlled and perceptually like standard young talent to make sure that your training and coaching and investment isn't all over the place with like a completely
That roster feels like it may have the highest variability of any of them, just because there's so much change.
Mm-hmm.
Like when your only returning player is someone who is already playing in a role swap, this could go basically any direction. Like these new players could all absolutely show out and be amazing, or you could go 10th and go 18. Like it could go either direction. I think both things are possible, and I think they're going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I think a lot of people saw what Mad did, bringing up mostly a team from an underrepresented region with a new brand, and they finish first in.
Rogue finished first regular season.
Right.
Med was second regular season.
So
yeah,
maybe that's what the mindset here is.
Hey, guess who we're talking about next? It's Mad Lions, because no disrespect to them, I think that Schalke is going to be better next year, and I would be comfortable about that based on form at the end of the LEC, based on the roster changes that have been made. I think that Mad may have slipped down a tier, and so we're going to talk about them first. So it's fun that this is how this shook out. I promise I didn't plan this, but the next three teams we're going to talk about are the three teams in the league who have players with Turkish residency, because you have Blue on the previous roster, you have Armut, who is a big star of the Worlds play-in stage, and then you have Broken Blade, who took a bit of a circuitous route to get there, but is a player of Turkish residency on Schalke, who we'll talk about after this. But Mad Lions, you have Humanoid, Karzi, and Kaiser returning from their roster that finished second in the LEC in the spring and went to Worlds, even though they had a very disappointing outing at Worlds. Now you change up your top side with Armut, who was very impressive in that Worlds play-in stage, playing for Supermassive, and then you have Elyoya, whose name is going to be very fun to say, and I feel like there are going to be some jokes made about it just because it's really fun to say. What do you know about Elyoya, Eric?
So he's from the Spanish league, played on Movie Star Riders. It makes sense with where Mad's roots and connections are, which is with the Spanish scene. They were in the group that had the two finalists in it. with Gamer Legion and Rogue. So he got shat on is kind of what happened in EU Masters, and so like him not impressing me there doesn't mean too much because he was going up against a couple of very strong teams. So I don't really have too much info on Elioya, but like Movie Star Riders did look good in the Spanish league, and I really like the top Spanish league to me is just like packed with talent for the most part, and so whenever these players always seem to overperform, especially even when they get to the LEC stage. So I'm hoping that he'll bring something. Like honestly though, I really don't understand this move, and it's very disappointing to me because while Shadow had a terrible world showing, he hard carried them with Kaiser for most of the regular season and looked fantastic. So just because it wasn't a Lee Sin or like an early ganking jungle meta at Worlds, and so his Lilia looked like bad. He looked really bad on these AP junglers. Like, is that like what was happening to me that like made this call what they're going for? Because Shadow,
we know that Shadow is going to be teamless, at least as far as the LEC goes for next split. So there could be stuff going on here that we don't know about, but it does look a little bit odd, even as bad as he was at Worlds.
Yeah, because he was a top 2 jungler in the regular season, and so like him and Selfmade were the 2 best performing ones, and so like this move was kind of baffling. And so hopefully like Shadow figures it out and gets somewhere. But like, so like even though this team theoretically is an overall upgrade with picking up Armut, who is a more experienced top laner.
Do you think Armut is going to be able to stand up to the top class of top laners in EU?
I think he won't look as bad as Arome did. And so like that might not be like a huge like selling point, but it does free up how they play the map a bit more than what they were in with Arome. Like Arome like tried to make Jax work and it really didn't work. Like in the games where he was playing that, it still was really Kaiser and Shadow having to make sick plays on the map and Humanoid having absolutely ludicrous carry performances in order for them to get through those games. And with Armut, at least you're expecting you have a player who has a wider champion pool and who can play the map better, both winning and losing side. And so hopefully you have some control and stability. So like,
yeah,
it's
in terms of known quantities, this feels like it's a ton of pressure on Elioya to me.
Yeah. A ton of pressure on Elioya. And then also like, is it like, will they ever relieve pressure from Humanoid? Because Humanoid had to do some absolutely insane work in that play-in stage to try and get them out. And if you're going into this next split with like him still feeling all this pressure and needing to carry, you're in a very dangerous spot, especially with how this patch looks, which is that ADCs are not necessarily going to be very strong at the beginning. So if that's how this is going to play out, so you can't rely on Karzi to carry, then you're going to have to work some more magic. And so we'll really see how Mac transitions into this next year with this roster and what they can do with it.
Yeah, didn't Armut play like a lot of Malphite and Jax in Worlds?
He did, but like so I've seen him play a lot of different champions because he's been around for a while in the TCL. He's made it to Worlds multiple times
as well.
Yeah.
So, well, just assuming that like reading the meta, which looking at preseason is going to be very important. Like he's going to have
keep in mind it's November and we're gonna
you think they're going to fix it by then? Do you think Sunfire Cape?
I'm going to give Riot the benefit of the doubt on this. Remember, competitive isn't going to start until the middle of January. Like, and that's what, 4 patches away at this point. I have a feeling that the tank bullshit may be at least a little more balanced by then. I'm gonna give Riot the benefit of the doubt. They're gonna figure it out in 4 patches worth of time.
Oh yeah, so no Christmas, no holidays for Riot staff. You got to balance this game so Armut cannot clap on tanks.
Well, we know with the previous preseasons that the target is 11-1. It's not 10-23, 10-24, or 10-25. It's get it right by 11-1. That's the point of this whole preseason time.
But that's no fun. You don't want to see the pros struggle bus on stage.
Right? I'm not touching.
That's what All Stars is for. You just gotta
exactly.
Yeah.
Like, we know nothing about what the pro meta is going to look like in 2 months. Even less than we ever have before. Not a single thing.
I'm excited. I'm hyped for that.
Like, are they even going to bother playing ADCs?
Yeah. So like the big
then that hard-in miss out is going to be big.
This does feel like a good time for me to jump in and say the big thing we do know is that they haven't gotten rid of elemental drakes and they haven't changed Rift Herald. So the early game prio, as well as like this heavy objective focus, where backing in time to show up for Dragon, to show up for Rift Herald, to rotate on the map for these early objectives, to build these like early snowball leads to force a fight for 3rd and 4th Dragon, are still going to be there. And it's still incredibly powerful. Like, no amount of item changes is going to change that. Except if they make it so that 6 items is like ludicrously OP for some reason.
Well, and the jungle meta is the other thing that, like, we know that the world's jungle meta was super duper focused around hard farm, get your items ready, be ready for these objective fights. It doesn't feel like that is gonna change that much with how the items changed the game, and so the items may have helped some of the champions be able to keep up on clear speed, because that like was the biggest differentiation with why you're seeing Graves all the time, is he clears faster than just about everybody. Evelyn, when she was getting in, clears really, really fast. And I don't know if that's going to change. I think that the champions that do it may have, but I'm not a jungler and I'm not a pro, so I'm not going to guess that.
As a smooth brain jungler, objective control is the same, and it will be the same. And I think Riot will keep it that way because it makes competitive very interesting, because you have very timed, like, this is going to happen then, how are people going to play around it, and it progresses the game forward. So that's going to remain at least through this season.
Let's call it predictable excitement, because like I don't know, I don't necessarily think it's more interesting as a whole, but like it does mean that they have to fight to win. So like the big thing it shut down was like this pure style, like low kill gameplay for the most part, but like it also killed split push and like these other like strategies that like could have like massive crazy base race scenarios, like. And that's really disappointing on its own front, where like, you know, most of the base races were in, you know, bad leagues like the LCS, where like these teams just didn't know how to win games. And so you have to figure out like, how are you going to have excitement that's unpredictable, or like this like really above the line stuff? Because like if everyone's just going to fight over these dragon fights, that's very specifically like 6, 14, 20, 24 minute marks. It turns out that like you have like the only way you get more excitement out of that is from sick mechanical outplays, and I can keep watching LPL, that's fine, but like ideally there's more.
The other like piece of this preseason that feels like what we're going to need to know about is one of the things that feels the most different in games is the rate that you get your items online, and the like the power curve for different champions, if that makes sense. Like Caitlyn is always the example that comes to my mind when we talk about power curve and power trough, because Caitlyn famously is really, really strong early on one item and in lane, but then dropped off at 2 and 3 to come back once she got 4 and 5. It feels like that was one of the, obviously when you change the items, you change how champions' power curves feel within the game. And the other piece of that is average game time. Because if we're finishing games when champions are on 3 items, as like I know I'm doing the thing where I read Reddit front page, and that's where I get ideas to talk about. But if games are finishing in 26, 27 minutes, there is a problem with champions that would rely on 5 items to be relevant in a game. Like, it's not ever going to be a Sivir meta if you're not getting to 35, 40 minutes, no matter, like, that's just not going to be a thing. and how that fits into how pro teams figure out how to deal with that side of things. Like, do we pick a comp that's like super duper mid game powerhouse, 3 items, we are at our absolute strongest here, because we're going to finish the game at 3 items, and that's just how it's going to be. We're never going to need to worry about the 500 CS Sivir win condition, or like an infinite farm Senna win condition, or that kind of thing. Like, that's what I'm most interested in, because I think that's the kind of thing, like, it feels like this could be a really, really mid-game focused meta based on what it looks like right now.
And because of that, like, one of the highlights of the new items is that it could be that there are more build paths that have earlier spike patterns, where like you have builds you could do with different mythics or whatever that put you strong at 2 and then 3 items, and then are just trash when you hit 4 and 5. and maybe that's just the better way to build. Build your Dust Blade of Drakthar, which is actually just really strong all like the entire game. So that's a bad example. But like, build your like early game spike choice for like Gale Force over Kraken Slayer, or like build your Immortal Shield bow for like the shield, even though it gives you like no late game damage output. If it means you can like spike hard for 1 and 2, and then it doesn't matter if like the rest of your build is trash, because like you have enough power for when you need it in like what your expected game duration is. And then you just hope your opposing team is bad if you get behind then, so that you can like get deep enough in your build to hopefully pivot or something. But
yeah, like I'm interested in that, because that feels like an adaptation teams could make, is just go super duper hard on 1, 2, 3 item spikes and try to really go hard on mid game and see where that gets them. Which that's the kind of thing that leads to really explosive games and really big team fight, as opposed to we're gonna sit and scale with Ashe and Senna for 5 items, because I don't. Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, let's get back to free agency.
Yeah, pro teams.
Let's talk about Schalke, because Schalke, I was disappointed not to see them at Worlds. I think almost everybody was, to a certain degree, after the run they went on, adding Gilius back into the roster and seeing the absolute 180 in form that Abidaga did is unlike almost anything I've seen in Pro League, because he was really bad for a good chunk of last year, and then turns around and turns into one of the best mid laners in EU, just out of absolutely nowhere. So I'm excited to see where this team can go. They keep, they added Neon last spring. The Limit is the new signing. He was on SK last year,
right?
And then keep Abidaga, keep Gilius, and add Broken Blade from TSM over to Odawamne, who left for Rogue. So, I think this is a top 4 roster in EU.
Yes.
It looks sick. We'll have to see which Gilius shows up. Is like, because like
he's never had a. I don't think he's ever really had a run like the run that he went on either. Because the problem with Gilius over his entire career has been consistency.
Like the best he looked before that was when he got Unicorns of Love into the EULCS, which is like, what, 6 years ago now?
It's a long time.
And then they immediately benched him for Kickass. So like it's like this whole story of his career where he also hasn't had a stable roster for very long. It's always been upset, and whenever these rosters change, his teams look worse. So I'm really curious to see how this goes. Limit looked great on SK last year. Like, Limit and Crown Shot were the redeeming factors of that team, which had some serious problems. And so, like, getting a really strong playmaking support makes a lot of sense. Neon looked good in their split, but I mean, it's really hard to tell how much of that was Odawamne, Gilius, and Abadage just like really popping off. But their top side of the map last split looked fantastic. Abba, like you mentioned, that it was the biggest 180 that you've ever seen, and while that's true, like before Schalke fell off the face of the earth with this when they picked up Forgiven, Abba looked like one of the best mid laners in the league. And so seeing like him go back to form, to me, it was more of a return from like, this is what this roster should have been when they signed Forgiven and Gilius the last time around, and then they just couldn't make it work because it turns out Forgiven's a trap. And so you have to like figure out like how to build your roster in this way to achieve goals. And so I'm really hoping that they can move it forward well. Broken Blade can play more carries than Oduwamne could. And so now you have a carry top laner and a carry mid laner, so Gilius can play Sejuani all split long. Gilius, king of the boar. But you know, I'm really excited for this team, and I agree that they definitely look very strong going into this.
Yeah, for sure. And mid jungle synergy is a thing that is talked about a lot. And a common theme among these top 4 teams is that mid jungle synergy is a big deal for the things that they want to do. And Gilius and Abadage, we as you look at the 6 teams we talked about first, Skeins and Milica for Vitality are the only one of the 6 that even played together last year. Where I think all the top 4, except for Fnatic with Selfmade and Niski, didn't Niski play for Fnatic before? Was that a thing?
I think he played on like their academy roster.
He played on their academy team, I want to say. But yeah. Like Selfmade and Niski is the only one you have questions about, and you know the quality of the 2 individual players. Where the other 3, Jankos, Caps, Inspired, Larson, Gilius, Abadage, they all play together. They know how to play together, and I think that's a core feature of these top 4 teams is that we know exactly what we're going to get from them right away, and it's an area that's going to be really, really strong. So as we follow the top laner trail of crumbs, we will head next to Rogue, who have Oduwamne because they lost Finn to the NA experience. Rogue has Oduwamne in the top lane, and then keeps their middle core of Inspired and Larson and Hansama, and then adds Trimby in the bot lane. Who, Eric, you talked about Trimby before. Do you want to talk about Trimby a little bit?
He looked great. He did a wonderful job setting up plays for that Rogue team in the EU Masters tournament. I'm really curious about how Trimby performs on this stage. He's also the player they decided to hold on to, right? Because with 4 of their 5 team members making it into this league, and this is the one they decided to keep actively. Like, they could have kept Vander and just kept playing with Vander, but instead they traded off that contract, grabbed the check, and now they're playing they kept Trimby. Like, this is the one they decided to put on this roster. And that's a huge sign of faith to me in what they're expecting this roster to do. Freddy122, in my opinion, is the best player turned coach that has played in this league. Like, I think he's had more success even personally to me than Young Buck, although because Young Buck's been given more to work with. Like, Freddy122 has never had the G2 or the Fnatic bank to work with, but he's consistently made these rosters look excellent. And so I have a lot of trust in how they made these calls. Hansama too is like one of these bot lane players who's actually an upgrade from Moonlight. And so getting to see Trimby play with an even stronger ADC and set up plays for the Draven one trick will be incredible. And so I'm really excited to see how that side of the map plays out. And then they didn't, like, one of the big things that you always worry about is like, oh, we just lost our veteran player who like brings stability and a sense of like game knowledge and helps you recover late game. And so with Vander leaving, what do? Well, they signed Oduwamne, who is like well regarded specifically from that Schalke run last split, and Gilius was very outspoken saying how much Odo brought to their gameplay in that huge run. So they replaced their veteran voice with another veteran voice who's also an upgrade in that role. So like this roster looks sick as a whole, and I'm excited to see like how they approach the game and if they can actually do more now than they did before, or if they just are going to like slow roll everyone.
And in case people forgot, because we started this podcast talking about the World season, so we've talked about Worlds and didn't talk about the regular season. This team won the regular season in EU last split. They were the best team in the regular season in EU last split, period. And they may have upgraded.
Yep.
Just saying, like, buy your stock to get second.
Oof.
Can't beat G2.
Can't be.
Can't do it.
Yeah, we're gonna get there because I think Rogue might be better than Fnatic, and we can go right down that road right now. Fnatic keeps their shot calling core of Selfmade and Hillsong and keeps Bwipo in the top lane, and then adds Niski to replace Nemesis and adds Upset to replace Reckless. Which, as far as a Reckless replacement is going to go, if you're going to lose him, this is about the best one you can get. Upset was in prison on that Origin roster last year and has clearly been one of the best ADCs in EU for a little bit now. So to see him get the proper support of this Fnatic roster is, I think, a really good thing and could be a really good thing moving forward. If I were going to worry about something on this roster, it's Hilly.
Well, so a lot of the commentary about the Fnatic roster that went to Worlds is that they had really they had two voices that really wanted to go in and to force plays in Bwipo and Hillsong, and they had two players who really just wanted to slow roll and play very defensively in Nemesis and Reckless. And so then it was really whatever Selfmade said that flipped the coin, and then you hope that Selfmade made good decisions.
And like Selfmade by nature, as we know, wants to be an aggressive player. That's been his reputation the entire time he's been in the league.
So if we think about how this roster plays out, though, like they brought in Niski, who had this dominant regular season run with Cloud9 by playing roaming pressure mid laners. So here we've given the best jungler in the league with Selfmade a roaming mid laner who isn't going to just like sit locked into mid lane, losing lane on TF repeatedly. This is the guy who plays mid lane Pantheon and then will show up and back you up when you're fighting for that scuttle crab like he's supposed to do. So, like, it really frees up their gameplay in that sense. So I'm hoping that Bwipo can finally play off the wall picks instead of in these tank v tank matchups or whatever the hell, and it'll actually free up their map. I also really like what this team gives Upset, because Upset's career has been dominated by teams with no late game voices and no direction, where like they might have had early game leaders like Xerxes. Or I don't remember who his jungler was before Xerxes, but like he's been on these rosters that haven't known what to do in late game or in mid game, where they've just like slow bled out games, and a part of that is like, you know, he's a lot like Reckless in the fact that how he approaches the game is very stable and his mechanics are very solid, but he's not like a aggressive playmaker who's going to take over the map for you on his own. So you need to have a team that's able to make plays that then enable him to show off his mechanics. So, you know, it's very clear that the team is going in, and this is a roster that will do that, and that I believe has a lot more in play to move around the map now to free up Hylissang and Bwipo into what they wanted to do last split.
If I were to take the devil's advocate, this could go badly side, we have long referred to Hylissang, who I love dearly, as a coin flip player. Fnatic is now a coin flip team until proven otherwise. Because you're right, the calls are all likely to be more unified now. Upset's been known as a dominant bot laner in lane for a long time now, and is going with a team that wants to be really aggressive in lane. It wants to roam, wants to do stuff. The problem is if that goes wrong, we know what it can look like when it goes wrong for Hylissang in particular, and for Bwipo, who's had a reputation for dying a lot some of the time. And if everybody dies a lot, you lose the game, usually. So I like that the philosophy is unified. It needs to work, because it can go really badly if it doesn't.
I think that's what they've built here is like they have a team full of agency that wants to do stuff, but then at the end of the day, you have someone stable in Upset that can just emerge from the chaos and just right click heads, and that's going to be your play style. It's unpredictable still, just because you don't know when or what. Like I think this is the team that you're gonna have like Niski, Whipwo, and Hillisang all just show up somewhere where they're not supposed to be, and then Upset's still farming, and then like fires a Caitlyn ult into the fight or whatever to pick up the kill, and they'll do that, and some people may die and they do whatever, but then he's still farming, he's still playing his part, and then they have that rock solid foundation to lean on if it goes south. So I think it's going to be really enjoyable to watch, but I think they have kind of pick their play style, and now they have the opportunity to play with agency and work around these objectives and kind of find the cracks in the consistent play style of the other teams.
Yep, for sure. All right, well, let's talk about presumed number one. G2, who keep 4 of their 5 players and their coach. They keep Wonder, Caps, Yankos, and Mickey, and while losing Perks sucks because you're losing probably the best player in Europe's history, you were already playing him out of position, and he did fine at that, more than good enough to be competent at the world level stage. Reckless is probably an upgrade, which is terrifying.
Yes.
Eric, I don't think the discussion with this G2 roster, it could go wrong, but the ceiling of this team is a world championship.
Yeah.
You can't say that about very many teams in the world. The ceiling of this team is winning worlds.
It is, and they look fantastic. This roster seems insane. I'm like when Caps left to go to G2, Reckless was shocked by that because he wanted to keep playing with Caps. And so now this is Reckless going to Caps on this roster, which is insane. I'm hoping this is going to be like a dark Reckless, like when Meteos joined Phoenix 1, right? And so you change the color scheme of the jersey, and now he's like this evil version and suddenly like dominates everyone, even though he hadn't looked as good recently. I'm hoping that's what this turns into for Reckless, is here's Reckless. He's playing with Mickey instead of Hillisang this time. He's got Yankos giving him first blood every game. This is going to be sick. So I'm excited for like seeing this roster play out. The only thing that we'll have to find out is like, how much winner drive did Perks bring than the other players? But I don't know if that's a big deal because Wonder and Caps and Yankos and Mickey have been playing with Perks for years. So they've already picked this up. It's in their blood. It's in that G2 culture. Like only G2 and Fnatic in EU know how to win games late from unwinning scenarios or from risky plays. They're the only ones that really could do it. And so watching this roster now, like these are players from those 2 orgs who have that experience and still will be able to make it work. So it should be a blast. The biggest question mark with this team for like, can they win worlds or not, to me is still like, is it a meta game where Yankos can snowball the lanes?
Yankos is the question mark with this team for me.
Yankos, multiple time MVP, first blood king.
Problem.
Yeah,
his performance at World was a problem for G2.
His performance at Worlds on these champions that they didn't play to get out of playoffs and win the league. So in some conversations with Wonder and these other players on different podcasts, he talked about how like they had to win LEC, they had to hit peak in order to win LEC after their terrible regular season performance for reasons, and then like coming out of the lower bracket in order to win. Like they had to hit peak then, and to do that they had Yankos play these tank pressure junglers like Volibear. He played Lee Sin, he played these other he played set. He played a lot of set. And then at the world stage, the meta was completely different and shifted from that. And it completely invalidated all of that work they put into to win LEC and like how they tried to approach that meta in order to dumpster Fnatic 3-0 in that final. And so like it's really unfortunate in some ways that that's the way it played out, and that could have like destroyed their run at Worlds. But on the same note, even if they could play well with like, you know, farming carry junglers on Yankos, like the Graves, like the Lilia, like the Nidalee, it still isn't what I would have wanted to see from G2. I still want to see Yankos on champions that can put Wonder ahead, put Caps ahead, and then like watch their like insane laners like have these leads and be able to take over the map. So that was really unfortunate. And I do think that the meta being at what it was, like, hurt them quite a bit.
Yep, for sure. And it's the question is how far did they go around it? Because it does seem like, as you look at, like, if we look at G2 on a wider scale, this is a team, like, coming from a traditional sports angle, that they're at their highest power level they'll ever be at right now. They, based on the timelines of the players that are on their roster, which Reckless fits their timeline perfectly. He's been playing professionally for 7-8 years now. Like, he's one of the most experienced players out there. You've got a bunch of players who, like Yankos, it feels like he's been around for forever. Caps feels like he's nearing the, like, peak of his powers right now. You wonder what this looks like in 2 years, for example. Because it's like, how long is Reckless going to have this drive? He obviously started super, super young. So he's not old by any standards. But by 2022, he will have been playing professionally for a decade. And that's something we don't know what that looks like, because you can count on one hand the number of players that have been playing that long at this point, particularly if Double Lift decides to hang it up. Like, there just aren't that many.
And saying they play at the same level is very different too.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and we question sometimes, like, the motivation levels for Wonder and Yankos. Like, Yankos, I know, has been doing a ton of streaming this offseason, has been doing really successfully with that. How long do they keep that competitive drive up to play at the absolute highest level? Basically, what I'm saying is, how soon should we expect the G2 self-made announcement?
Wow. I think it becomes a question mark. Do they win Worlds? If they win Worlds here, they either are like, yep, we peaked and that's it, or if they lose, is it like, well, we built this team and we can either keep going and get that trophy, or I think it's a double-edged sword. It's either they win it and then they want to create a dynasty. I don't know. It's really wild to think about. We might be seeing the complete longevity of player, like, timelines. Like, the question mark always has been, how long can you play professional League of Legends at the top tier? Is it 10 years? Is it 20 years? Not 20.
we're going to watch it happen, because this is what we're going to see. Yeah. I want to say, I think it was confirmed that Reckless signed a 3-year contract, so, like, he's in this for a while now.
Yeah.
And I think the journey with them is going to be as fascinating to watch with anything. I don't think it's going to go wrong, but it's interesting.
I really believe that they're going to treat the regular season as scrim season and try to learn as much as possible or experiment as much as possible, lock it together for playoffs. And I think that when you build a team like this and when you have the personalities that you have here, your only objective is winning Worlds. And they need to do it here. I really think that if they're going to show up, they've been so tantalizingly close each time, and you need to lock it down with this. There's not going to be an excuse to not make it into finals.
Yep, this is their chance. Well, it's the first of their chances. I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
So I'm so interested to see how this looks and if it works as well as it seems like it should, because it seems like it should be the best thing Europe's ever seen. But we'll see. We'll quickly jump to a couple of confirmed NA roster moves that we hadn't didn't get to last week. So a couple things have moved around since we last talked before we are done for the night. Eric, thoughts on CLG Wild Turtle?
I like Turtle a lot. It continues to put them in this like strong but still probably fairly cheap roster configuration where like we talked about,
it's veteran experience. That was my whole theme. You just brought in one of the 3 most experienced ADCs in the history of the LCS. Veteran experience.
And without breaking the bank. Like this is a team with a lot of gameplay experience that they didn't have to sign over a $5 million buyout or whatever it was for perks. So, they might not have the same ceiling that Cloud9 has, but this is a team that like should win some games.
Yep, which is an upgrade. It's a strict upgrade.
Get to 7. That's the goal.
It looks like Dig signed FakeGod. I hadn't caught that. Oh, that's exciting.
I also hadn't caught that. That's really interesting.
Oh, it was announced in Hotline League apparently. So that's cool though. That's cool though. If
FakeGod was one of the players that have been most requested to be seen in LCS. That people were surprised he hadn't made a roster, so that makes sense for them.
Yeah,
he played for CLG, right? 2 years ago.
No, he was on 100 Thieves Academy underneath Someday. They actually played him over Someday at the Rift Rivals with EU, and people were very salty about it.
Yep.
But like he looked pretty good, and like when they played him in LCS, he looked pretty good. Like he was not the problem with their with their gameplay. He also was one of the top 3 top laners in Academy from overall performance with Fudge and Revenge, who are also both starting right now. So and he beat Revenge in lane. So like this is a good spot for him to make his like LCS appearance. He also didn't seem to like have stage jitters or anything, and he did play on stage, not in the remote, COVID experience. So like and it looks like they signed Soligo too, who was also from a 100T Academy scene. So like more of those 100T Academy players making it up is great.
And Soligo had played. Did he play for 100T in LCS a while back?
When they did the full swap.
He played on the LCS stage before too.
Yeah. So he has stage experience. I wasn't as thrilled with Soligo. They brought him. Part of that though was that they brought him in after Huhi, and that Huhi roster wasn't working out, and that made me so incredibly sad. So like that was probably my own bias more than his actual gameplay, because he did fine.
Thoughts on Johnson to FlyQuest?
I think it's a good move.
It's a great move.
That roster is incredibly young and incredibly strong. So like it definitely feels like they bought just like in the old days of when C9 was farming teams to get promoted into LCS through the play-ins. This is C9's Academy team getting bought out by an LCS roster and franchising. And like from prior iterations of that, they're going to be in like top 4. So you gotta always be careful with how that works out. Because like Gravity is like one of my big examples of a team that like showed up and then like had a really good run. So we got to see what they do with it.
Speaking of Cloud9 Academy, Cloud9 Academy is forming an OPL team. I don't know if you guys had heard this news, but it appears to be, it's been reported from the Aussie esports media that Schernfire will be jungling for C9 Academy, and also Isles from Legacy's Worlds team will be playing for them. So they have Schernfire King and Isles as the core of their academy team now, and are really like focusing on the OPL talent. And I know Tally, who is another OPL player for a while, signed for another NA Academy team. So we're starting to see, we've seen some of the OCE talent come through at the top level, but it looks like the Academy scene is going to be a lot of OCE talent based on what it's looking like now.
Which you should do. It's a free, like, I don't know, when they made that change to how that region was working, you had to expect that they were just going to pull the top players from that and put them in to the pipeline.
Yep, for sure. I'm trying to figure out what the other ones I'd seen before.
Bobbitt's on TSM Academy.
Yep, that's another one. So the entire that's the entire Legacy roster picked up, I think.
Which you we wanted as an entire team for LCS, so putting it sprinkled throughout Academy, I think, is an amazing opportunity for these players, but also good leverage for the franchisees to cultivate some talent and hopefully build them up into good contracts.
Yep, for sure. I'm interested to see who now. I'm scrolling through Reddit to try and find stuff, but it looks like yesterday someone thought the FNKY was going to be on C9 Academy, so they still have a top lane opening that I'm interested to see who they get. Because that, like, it has been a tradition for a while. You want to see where the next good players that are going to play in the LCS are, look at C9 Academy. Yep. So that's like reading the tea leaves right there. Lastly, speaking of going even beyond Academy, we talked about Golden Guardians going the fullest budget. How much collegiate did you watch, Eric?
A bit, but collegiate is rough. I'm going to be honest.
Niles and Iconic making the jump straight from collegiate to LCS with Golden Guardians.
Right.
So I saw Niles in Scouting Grounds, and I think Niles is good. So so giving him a shot makes sense to me. I don't remember. Iconic wasn't even in Scouting Grounds this time, right?
Nope.
Wow.
Aren't they both from Maryville?
They're both from Maryville. Shout out to the Loop.
I actually know a little bit about Maryville, and they dominate the collegiate scene. That they are probably one of the first college scenes to really invest in. I'm guessing it's infrastructure, because Maryville, I think, since the beginning of like the collegiate scene, has been a presence, and so they're reaping the benefits from that now. And
yeah, so some of the brains who had started the Enemy org, which was in LCS back before franchising, like helped set up the Maryville esports ecosystem. They also had a lot of Challenger before Academy. It was like Challenger League or whatever. They had Challenger League players who got brought on to either play on for the school and then transitioned into coaching roles for them, or actually just were brought on to coach. And so they definitely had a really good investment there that turned into a talent funnel at minimum. Definitely. I even more kind of what we talked about with Astralis and EU, where it's this rebuild and then really focusing on young talent. That definitely feels what GGS is doing, with Ablaze Olive and Newbie also starting. And then they have Chime, Prismal, Yunbi, Rosethorn, and Tally in that in Academy or whatever. This is a full 10 that's a lot of young players. Tally is Stixay has the most stage experience out of these players, and then it's Tally, and those are the top two.
Tally's been around the OCE scene for a long time.
So Enero, and then and they brought in Cubs to also help with this. They're definitely trying for a rebuild and to also build talent up, and so we'll see how it plays out.
Tally has been playing. He started with Legacy first in October of 2014, so he's been playing professionally for a really long time at this point.
Yeah, I think Golden Guardians is in the right spot to do this kind of rebuild. They're not at risk like a CLG would be. They placed decently well in regular season. They just so do this now. Everyone else is doing it, so not being above it, I think, is fine. And that brand, because it's younger and they didn't have the opportunities to bring in a legacy brand following, or I don't even think they necessarily had players that they could bring in that had their own following when they started franchising. So this is a good opportunity, just fresh start. Let's get some players in here. Let's train them up, give our coaching staff and our everyone in the back end a lot of opportunity to mold some minds and get some rewards for it.
Yep, it's going to be very interesting to see how it shakes down. I'm looking forward to seeing, like, on both sides of this, how the academy rosters shake out, because I think it's really interesting. That's about it. I will note a couple of interesting roster moves I've seen from the Asian side of things. Quick thoughts, Eric, on the Deft and Chovy to Hanwha Life Esports.
Did they get like a bucket of money or something?
Yes.
Like, because
Creative franchising has officially happened.
okay, because like Hanwha Life like suddenly like just bought out like all these like huge name players, and like that was, and I don't know enough about like Korean funding to know like how much sponsor money they have there, but like those were some big names they signed like this year.
Well, and that's it. It feels like the funding paradigm has changed as Korea goes into franchising, because all of a sudden, when you kept your ear to the ground about the rumors for Deft and Chovy in particular, it was apparently between Hanwha and Afrika, both of whom notoriously have never been that successful in the LEC, but both of whom are funded by major Korean companies. So it seems like, as opposed to like a T1 or a KT, the more like traditional esports side brands that also have big money behind them, but like, or a Samsung, for example, which we remember when after Samsung won Worlds, they didn't pony up the money to keep their roster together. So it seems like maybe now with the franchising model in, like, HLE and Afrika are like, okay, it's time to splash the cash.
From what I remember in reading through the branding booklet, so when you do a bid for franchising, you have to come in with your investment plan, more or less. And a lot of that is with like, in your first year, how are you going to build up a following, and how are you going to get eyes on the streams? So basically you have two paths from there. You either invest in known players that are going to attract an audience on their own, or you're going to come in with a franchise brand that has legacy within the scene. It sounds like that was the option that they went for, was we're going to slash the cash and bring in these players that are going to bring in the eyes and going to bring in the performance.
Well,
so we know
and
within the first year.
off their worst split in years.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the Hanwha's reputation is they've been the playoffs gatekeeper. They finished 6th every year, but they were god awful this last split. So I'm glad to see them looking to turn it around. Now the flip side of this is, we see Deft and Chovy. They left Dragon X. I have no idea what Dragon X is going to do. That's one of the things I'm most interested in from an LCK angle is, all the news have been is who's Hanwha going to sign, who's Afrika going to sign. Dragon X doesn't have a team right now.
Yeah, they just have Piosik and Doran, and it's like those were not the highlights of that roster. So
do we?
It's pretty fascinating.
Forgive me for my ignorance.
And Viper being one of the big name Korean ADCs, that's a free agent on the moment from Hanwha. The latest rumors have him going to the LPL, rumored to EDG. So that's another one off the table.
So with LCK going franchise, are they doing like the 10 teams, and are they known already?
I think all of them are known already. I know one of them rebranded, and I know Jin Air didn't make it. I think it's mostly just the 10 that were in the league last split.
Yeah.
With, I think, who was the one that rebranded? I should know this.
It's not a huge deal, but just like, so they're no longer volleying for like opportunity to be in the league. So Dragon X might just be able to ride off of brand recognition as well and use this as a rebuild year and pick up some younger talent. That's probably what that would mean.
So I see Afrika, Damwon, DRX, Genji, Hanwha Life, High Fresh Blade.
High Fresh Blade was, oh boy, I really should know this because they were a team that was in the league.
I don't see it.
Oh no, they were Breon Blade. They were in Korean Challengers last split.
Okay. KT Rolster, T1, Sandbox Gaming, and Team Dynamics is the list.
Yeah, Dynamics is the one I couldn't think of. But yeah, High Fresh, and if I remember right, yeah, they won. Oh no, they didn't win Challenger playoffs, but Breon Blade has been a Korean Challenger team for a while at this point. So it'll be interesting to see what they deal with. They haven't announced anybody yet, so we're gonna have to see. It's still early in the Korea and China player rotation. I know the most recent news I saw there was Gumayushi T1's ADC prodigy wonder kid signed an extension through 2022 or 2023 today. So that's locking down that future. He played a little bit over Teddy towards the end of the split, but I still kind of think Teddy's probably going to play a good bit, or they should sell him to a team that needs an ADC. But we'll see. Also, while we've been on this show, in regards to both NA and China news, Suning officially announced Sword Art's departure. We don't know what that means yet, but Reggie has been in their Twitter replies memeing. So
it's something.
We shall see.
Double F is sweating if he's gonna have to bow out or not.
So that's been announced while we've been here. So we'll have to see how that works. So who knows? Anyway, we're gonna wrap up as we always do with, hey guys, what you been playing? So Eric, I know what you played tonight because I saw that match history. How does Tristana feel with New Age?
Well, so this was I really like playing with these new itemizations, like the crazy stuff. So that Tristana game was Hail of Blades with Duskblade. So I jump in, I one-shot someone, and then I turn invisible, and then I jump out. And that was very fun. That was almost as good as the Urgot with Kraken, Slayer, Hurricane, Ravenous Hydra, where you just like activate the turret legs and then everything around you explodes. It's very satisfying. There's a lot of really fun stuff you can do that's not actually good. That's kind of where I'm at right now.
Steven, what you been playing?
I'm a good old schmuck. I haven't played since last week. I'm doing my purification of my smooth brain jungle gameplay in preparation for Clash. So I have to come in with a pure mind and open to new solutions. So I think I'm gonna crack open Sejuani just with exploding some Sunfire Cape and what CC can do to the next to useless AD carry role.
Yeah, speaking of abusing Sunfire Cape while it exists, Funfire Wind Cape, is that the meme we go with? Poppy's good.
Yeah.
Poppy's good. And happens to be one of my mains, so that's been very satisfying to play a little bit of Poppy.
Hell yeah.
So that's where we're at. Steven, promo, go!
Go. Please go to the link tree. We have new merch coming like every day that we can get it up onto the store. I've ordered stuff and it's arrived. It's super comfy. I would be wearing it. Eric's wearing it because he's a good hero bro. Get them for Christmas gifts. We have a discount going on. If you put in FNKY, FNKY, you get 15% off of your order, which is super slick. We're also going to be doing a gamer wish list, which will be a compiled list of verified products that we suggest that you should buy. And it's going to be on Amazon. So if you need gift ideas or you need to tell people what you want, look at that list and it'll be a good time. That'll be on the link tree, but I think the domain will be funky.club.
There you go. You'll be able to click on that somewhere around this video and get all hooked up with that. So next week we will be back. We'll have to figure out what we're going to talk about because we're running short on free agency stuff to figure out because a lot of it's pretty locked down. So we'll know more, but we should be back next week at some point with a fresh episode for all you loyal listeners. Please like, subscribe, do all the fun stuff. Leave comments, give us feedback. Take care of whatever you need to do. If you are American, have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. Stay safe, stay healthy, eat delicious food, make delicious food. I'm excited for our Thanksgiving spread that we're going to have at my house with my wife and I. So it's gonna be a good old time. But for Steven and Eric, I am David. This has been the Reaction Time podcast, and we will see you next week.